Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. As part of your comprehensive news analysis, today we'll be discussing 5 articles out of the Hindu newspaper. Before we begin, I would like to remind you that we are now on Telegram, so you can use either the QR code or the link given in the description below to join us on Telegram. Before we begin, I would like to tell you how we are going to cover these articles, the modus operandi. First, we'll understand the context, then the basic points, and thereafter a summary which can be used in the exam. Remember, current affairs is not exclusive of static, and static is not exclusive of current affairs. Both are complementary to each other, and that is the link we are trying to find here. So when we talk about Nano Urea article, the context is that Nano Urea has been developed indigenously by the Indian Farmers and Fertilizers Cooperative and has been heavily advertised by the central government. However, the article is dealing with a totally separate issue, which is that there has been a discrepancy in the way the trials have been happening. When it comes to fertilizers, a very important aspect of agriculture, because our soil profile lacks nitrogen, urea being a very important source. Therefore, any fertilizer is certified via 3 trials. However, when it comes to Nano Urea, there has been a discrepancy that there are only 2 trials which have been conducted, and now Nano Urea has been certified by the IFFCO. So the basic question with regards to GS paper 3, Agri-Tech and Science and Technology, it becomes important. You need to understand what is urea, what is Nano Urea, why is it so important that we are discussing it here. So first question, basic question, what is urea? Urea, as I told you, is an organic compound which adds nitrogen to the soil. It's a fertilizer, has very high nitrogen content, close to 46%, but when it comes to its efficiency, it is not that good because it washes away with water or evaporates into the atmosphere. Therefore, close to 48-50% efficacy or efficiency is there when it comes to traditionalist urea, how it adds nitrogen to the soil. And more than that, when it comes to urea, we have our own domestic production capacity, but the demand is very big. Therefore, as of 2018, it is believed that 23.9 million tons has been imported into India, close to 42% of world's urea production. And the data as of right now 2021 tells us that close to 90 lakh tons has been actually imported into India, and that amounts to close to 40,000 crore rupees. So we can meet half of the demand through domestic production, but when it comes to the total demand, we are importing half of it from the world. Now, what is then Nano Urea and how is it so revolutionary? Nano Urea just uses nanotechnology in the delivery of urea. The basic point is how you add nitrogen to the soil. So Nano Urea is a patented and indigenously made liquid which adds urea or nitrogen into the soil by spraying it on the leaves, and its potentiality is that it can reduce the dependence of the farmer on packed urea and is much better in delivering nitrogen, and over and above that, it is even better when it comes to yield. So now that we understand the basic concept of what is urea and the concept of nanotechnology, which is any particle which is less than 10 raised to power minus 9 meters, now what is the standard traditionalist practice? Within a cycle of a crop in one season, there's a need for 90 kgs of urea, 45 kgs initially when you are sowing the crop, and then 45 kgs once the crop is standing with a canopy of leaves. 45 kgs we can produce indigenously, but 45 kgs we have to import. So what Nano Urea does is actually single half liter bottle of this liquid can compensate for 45 kgs of urea which is traditionally used in the second stage. There's an issue here also, but we'll discuss it later. So basically the yield increases by 7%, in organic farming it increases by 11%, but by 2025 if we adopt Nano Urea right now, we can become self-sufficient and we will no longer require that 90 lakh tons to be imported, saving close to rupees 40,000 crores for the government. So it's a revolutionary technology, has a potential to change agriculture itself. But then what is the issue? The issue is that you can't use it in the initial stage. You still need traditional urea in the beginning stage, which is that while sowing, this will not work because it can only be sprayed on the leaves and the leaves absorb nitrogen. That is why the efficacy. So traditionalist urea is still needed, and over and above that, the second stage urea can be substituted. This is the first issue. Second issue is a lot of experts are talking about, and this is what the article is saying, that the efficacy is very less. 7% increase in yield can just be done through basic agricultural technology being changed, or even monsoons and fertility over a period of time improves, so that 7% can actually come basically by the changing agricultural tech. Whilst the article is trying to question the efficacy, for us what is more important is how does it change our import profile. So the basic point which the article is making is that the ICAR, which is the Indian Council for Agricultural Research, has actually given up on one of the trials, which is technically not standard protocol. But why is this important for us? Let's leave the connotation of the article, because we don't have to go into government procedures, but what is the potentiality of this nano urea? Nano urea can potentially save close to 40,000 crores for the government, and over and above that it is even more important because it can make us self-sufficient. So 45 kgs we can produce in traditionalist way, and 45 kgs can be substituted by nano urea. Therefore, it can be a revolutionary technology, and in Khalol in Gujarat we already have a plant which is producing nano urea, and because it is indigenously produced and is patented, it can change our import profile and increase yield year on year, at least 7 to 8% it is doing. So basically in the exam, it's a mains question we are expecting from this area, because it's talking about urea as a fertilizer, but how nano urea can totally change the profile of this sector. And though the article is dealing with the criticism, we need to take out the positive, which is that there is a potential for India to save 40 lakh crores in its import, and that is where India needs to concentrate and the government needs to concentrate. Now let's move to the second article, which is equally interesting related to foreign policy, which is the Vostok 22 exercise happening in Russia as of right now. We already know Russia is in the news because of Russia-Ukraine issue, and Russia-Ukraine war in turn makes this exercise very interesting, because this exercise is happening in the backdrop of the war which Russia has induced into Ukraine. As much as we know that there are basic justifications which Russia is giving, it is a humanitarian crisis, it is a war at the end of the day, but India is trying to thread a needle. Russia has always been an all-weather friend for us, and it has been a very important ally diplomatically and generally when it comes to military technology. So India can't abandon Russia just because the US or the EU says it. EU itself is hypocritical, because at the end of the day they are taking Russian gas but asking India to take a very stern stance, which India is not ready to, and we should not also take in that regard. So basically India is trying to develop an independent foreign policy which is balancing and non-alignment, and again non-alignment in that sense has become very relevant today, because there's a new faction which has developed, which is the US and EU and Russia and China at this point of time. So the multilateral exercise is being held in Russia as of right now, and there are two legs to it. First is the land, and second is the maritime exercise. Here again there's an interesting angle because of the place where this maritime exercise is going to happen, which is near the Kuril Islands, which is a disputed territory between Russia and Japan is an important ally to India because of Quad. So basically the Vostok 22 exercise itself has become an epicenter for foreign policy, because India cannot go to a finicky and moody power like US, and at the same point of time cannot give up an all-weather friend like Russia because of the present situation. Therefore the article gives us 4 very valuable insights into how Indian foreign policy is being operated at this point of time. More than that, it also gives us an opportunity to understand where the Kuril Islands are. So Kuril Islands is a basic disputed territory between Russia and Japan, and it is in the Sea of Ostok, and Russia claims it, Japan claims it, and the maritime exercise very categorically, deliberately is being done in the sea so as to send a message to Japan. And when we talk about the exercise itself, it is not a small exercise. And if you know the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO is actually embedded within the Vostok 22 exercise. You have Algeria, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, India, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, China, Laos, Mongolia, Nicaragua, Syria and Tajikistan, who are actually the members. And more than that, China is engaging with us on this platform. Now India is in a dilemma. Basically, if it takes part in this exercise, it is being pro-Russia. At the same point of time, if it becomes a part of the maritime exercise, it undercuts the claim of Japan. So India has found a midway, which is that it's only sent a army contingent under 7-8 Gorkha rifles, and it has abstained from actually taking part in the maritime exercise. This approach of the foreign minister is very unique, and it gives us an insight into what the government of India is thinking at this point of time, therefore something very important for international relations. So what does India's participation hold? And this is where the mains and the theoretical aspect comes through. This is why the article is important, not the list of nations, because that is too much to remember. It is this basic concept. So by actually going to the exercise, India is saying to the world that we will continue to have a relationship with Russia despite the Ukraine issue. And India has been very, very clear, because when it comes to the UNSC resolutions, India has abstained from voting on Russia. And right now we are trying to balance and non-align with either. We are not saying that we are just the best friends of Russia or we're the best friends of US. We want to develop a policy in which we can engage with both of you irrespective of what is happening in the international scenario. So therefore, the first aspect which the article talks about is that India is still going to and is ready to engage with Russia despite the EU and the American criticism of Indian stance in this regard. And this is a very, very bold and very empowering stance which India has taken, therefore saying that we can't give up a friend which has always been there. As much as there is criticism for that, there is not justified, but we can't give up our biggest defense partner in that regard. You give us F-22 Raptors, we'll be ready to give up Russia. At this point of time, Sukhois, MiGs, everything comes from Russia in that regard. Therefore, the second point becomes equally interesting, which is that India is again comfortable to engage with both the US and the EU and the Russia and the China bloc. And the SCO meeting is coming up very soon. We'll be covering it again in this platform. But at the core, India is ready to engage with both. India is ready to have an independent foreign policy. We will not fall into this trap of blocs. We will not fall into the Cold War politics, which is now again engaging itself in the way of the Iron Curtain, moving from the east to west and then west to east. The basic point is India will not give up its good relationship with Russia just because the EU wants it, and the EU is already hypocritical on this aspect because they're using all the gas as much as they want from Russia, and economic sanctions are not working. Still they are ready to take the energy from Russia, but at face value want to criticize Russia. So India in that sense has taken a very bold stance, a very empowering stance in that regard. But what is more interesting is, by not going into the maritime exercise, India is also sending a message to Japan that we are sympathizing and are sensitive to the issue of the status quo with regards to the Kuril Islands. So India is not ready to also give up its Quad member, and it's trying to maintain the Japan relationship. And when we talk about China's presence, India is also ready to engage with China at all levels, even when the LAC, the line of actual control issue, is still a roadblock, is still a deadlock, and they are still building a bridge over Pyongyang So, which is an issue for Indian national security. But at the end of the day, India has a four-pronged attack at this point of time. We will engage with Russia, we will engage with US and EU also, we will make sure that Japanese interest is not undercut, and we'll also make sure that we are diplomatically engaging with China as much as they don't want to. And basically this gives us a unique stance. We have never seen such a nuanced and sophisticated understanding in Indian foreign policy, where we are now independently following a three-level, three-pronged attack or three-pronged engagement with different powers. For the first time, we are taking every power on case-to-case basis. We're not allowing any other power to dictate how we engage with the world, and this is a very unique stance, and this is the most important point you need to remember from this article. Now, moving to the third article, which is equally interesting, Economics GS Paper 3, and this you already know in a lot of aspects, but this is actually adding a new dimension. We already know about inflation, how inflation works, either based on too much demand or there's a supply issue. More than that, we already know that the consumer price index, the CPI, is used to measure the inflation percentage in the Indian economy. We already know the RBI is also trying to cool down the economy in the sense that it's trying to make sure that money circulation goes down. But what this article is talking about is not how macroeconomic indicators or macroeconomic policies are affecting inflation, but is talking about how state by state we need to change our approach. Basically, it's saying that inflation rates differ from state to state, but why is it that? So the context is that retail inflation was at a 8-year high in as of April at 7.79% and has slightly cooled down to 6.7%. Problem in this data is that it is not giving us a full approach. In several states and union territories, including Assam, Andhra Pradesh, Gujarat, Haryana and Telangana, they still face the same level of inflation at 7% despite overall cooling down. So basically this article is going to give you a lot of data. You don't have to engage with this data, it's too much to manage. You have other things to learn also. So we will concentrate on this point, what explains this variation, and this is where we are going to add to our knowledge. See, the state by state analysis shows that 14 states along with 3 UTs including Jammu and Kashmir face higher national inflation than actually the national average. So there is a certain section of the states which have still higher inflation than the other states, and the highest being in Telangana, West Bengal and Sikkim, close to 8% in that regard. So what we have to understand is what explains this discrepancy, and what explains this discrepancy is looking at food price inflation. Basically inflation it's a basket, a lot of different commodities are checked. We removed the energy and the core sectors. When we look at food inflation, we see a very unique pattern, and this is where this article is unique and a new dimension is added into our understanding. See, states which do not produce major crops themselves or are not producer states have seen higher food inflation as they have to actually import into their state all the grains. So there's transport cost which is added to it. So any state which is not producing its own food grains is seeing higher inflation because they have to actually get it from states or the neighboring states, and basically the transport cost is increasing the price. On the other hand, what is even more interesting is, and this is the new aspect which this article is talking about, is that in whichever state there is bigger rural sector, and because CPI, consumer price index of rural areas, the basket takes foods more. So the CPI rural, which is consumer price index rural and urban, there are two different. In urban, the food weightage is less. In rural, there's more weightage to food. So basically what is happening is that, so whichever state has more rural areas, because the CPI rural takes food into more account, and because food is already the one which is having more inflation, the data of the state is getting skewed because of the CPI rural data and the weightage. So the basic basket of rural India is taking more of food, therefore it is skewing the data. So just to summarize what these 2 points are saying, first point is saying is that if the state is not producing food grade itself, it has higher food inflation, therefore higher inflation itself. And whichever state has more rural sectors, more rural districts, this is the more interesting aspect, whichever state has more rural areas, there is a higher tendency for the data to show that it has higher inflation, because rural CPI, which is consumer price index, takes food more into account than other aspects or other goods in the basket of inflation. And this is something which you need to now talk about in your mains examination when there's a question on inflation. So what is the basic takeaway here? The basic takeaway of this new metric and understanding is that now when we talk about inflation being driven higher or lower, you need to take states vis-a-vis each other, and policy and governmental policy needs to be now based on pressure points and local indicators. It can't be that you have a broad brush ploy to just change the basic repo, reverse repo, and then control inflation. There's a need to now have a basic understanding of local issues, and sometimes price rise cannot be just triggered by global indicators but by local factors also. This is very important. You need to understand this, and this is why this article becomes important, because it is saying that inflation is not pan-Indian issue, it is state by state issue, and when we talk about state-based inflation, we need to also have policies which target the states which don't have their own food producing areas. Their transport cost should go down. At the same time, the CPI rural basket needs to remove food grains, or the weightage should be reduced, so that it gives a better perspective between states, because the states which have more urban areas, it is showing that this inflation is cooling down. But on the other hand, though there is cooling down of inflation, maybe in a state where there is more rural areas, it is still showing a skewed data because the CPI rural has too much emphasis on food. So this is a very interesting way in which the article is explaining to us why is that from state to state we are still seeing price changes and price rise. So please use this new understanding in any answer when it comes to inflation in the exam. Moving on to a small but interesting topic which is related to the Enforcement Directorate now searching fintech firms in Bangalore. There was a raid which happened yesterday at very big names such as Razorpay and Paytm, and this is linked to a larger context of what is called micro loan app case. See, basically what is happening in India as of right now is people, when they need easy credit, are going to these apps, getting 25,000, 50,000 basic loans of very small amounts. But the people who are giving this money, they look like they're Indian operators, but they're actually Chinese based operators. And what they do is that when you're taking this loan, they don't reveal how much interest is given, or they hold on to that data. On a 24,000 rupees loan, they're trying to extract 3.5 lakh rupees. And when you're resisting, there's a lot of extortion which is happening, harassment which is happening. And because these apps, when you install them, they take your permission of gallery and contacts. They're even calling the contacts and saying that this person has taken money from us, he's not a credible person. They're misusing the photos and putting it on social media. So there has been a flurry of cases where people have been harassed by these micro loan apps, and now the ED is going after it. In 2021 we saw the similar issue, but it was related to money laundering, and now it's become a cyber issue because these apps themselves have become a problem to our national security. So it is again GS paper 3, but article is small, but it gives us a very important perspective about how we need to stay away from these apps also, and how cyber security goes beyond just security in social media apps, but to these credit based apps which are there in the Google Play Store. Therefore, at Razorpay, cash free payments and Paytm in Bangalore, there were major raids which happened, and the agency then seized 17 crore rupees which were held by certain merchant IDs which are actually not in India. And the larger core issue and the scheme is that individuals are now being harassed and extorted money, and more than that, and these individuals who are actually seeking basic credit line are now facing major uphill task to pay them back. And what is more concerning is that these Chinese operators have actually forged documents to show that the board of members are Indian, the directors are Indian, and this is the new concern, that these apps can actually manipulate the people who are giving this money, and these Chinese operators which are actually outside the national law can now even go after the basic debtor in India in that regard. Therefore, as personally, we need to stay away from these apps itself, but it is also another aspect to cybersecurity which has been added recently. And if there's a question which comes related to how the ED is acting against cybersecurity, a financial institution, and more than that, how the basic concept of credit-based apps have now become a new zone of criminal activities, first in 2021 money laundering and now basic extortion. There's a need to change the financial mechanism, and more than that, the regulatory mechanism around it. So the way forward would be to change the regulatory mechanism. Personally, we have to stay away from them, but at the same point of time, it's a new zone which has been added. The last topic which we discuss, very simple but very interesting, it's related to defense technology. Now, in the recent cabinet committee on security meeting, the CCS, we'll discuss about it. The CCS has now sanctioned an LCA Mark II, the light combat aircraft. The LCA Mark 1 was nothing but the Tejas, and now Tejas will be succeeded by a bigger and more capable fighter by the DRDO. DRDO will then develop it with Hull, the Hindustan Aeronautical Limited, and by 2027 flight testing is being planned. So basically the next 5 years we'll have a bigger version of Tejas. But what is more interesting is, as much as it is a topic related to defense technology becomes important for prelims and mains, it gives us an insight into and an opportunity to revise what is Tejas. Tejas, developed by Hull, an important light combat aircraft. More than that, it has increased India's capability to become better in the larger context of our air capability. But the CCS is equally important, which is the Cabinet Committee on Security. What is its role? It is the body which actually debates, discusses and appoints of and in national security bodies. So DRDO would directly report to the Cabinet Committee on Security. These decisions are taken there only, and the Prime Minister, Defense Minister, Minister of Home Affairs, Minister of Finance and Corporate Affairs, along with the Minister of External Affairs are the members. Please remember, this can come in the exam. And the Tejas has already increased our capability. But another important aspect related to the CCS is that there is a proposal for a 4th generation fighter indigenously developed in India in this committee, and that is still on hold. So while Tejas and Mark II is already approved, there is a proposal for an indigenous fighter which is more or less 4 or 4.5 generation fighter, and it has a potentiality to become the new MiG or Sukhoi in that regard. But what do we mean by Mark II? This is the other aspect which you need to know. Small topic but important, that when we say Mark II, it means enhanced range, endurance, onboard oxygen generation system, because they fly at a very high altitude. More than that, they want to now integrate heavy standoff weapons such as the Scalp, Crystal Maze and the Spice 2000 missile. And basically when these will be integrated by 2025, we should have a better fighter than Tejas, but Tejas itself has become important. This also gives me an opportunity to just revise with you what do we mean by generation of fighters. And the first generation fighters were the ones which used to use turbojet engines during the Second World War itself, and after that came a generation which we still use, unfortunately, which is that MiG-21 is a 2nd generation fighter which we still use, delta wings, guided missiles. Then you have 3rd generation fighters again, which are linked to Indian Air Force, because we have the Mirage 3 and MiG-25 also. These have better avionics and radars. Now they're becoming more and more sophisticated. 4th generation fighters is where we are at as of right now, 4.5, developed in 1990s. Sukhoi 27, MiG-29, Mirage 2000, very very important for us. Fly-by-wire controls, basically there's no physical control of the aircraft, it is all based on computer technology. 4.5 Sukhoi 30 MKI we still use. It is based on stealth and avionics, which are based on electronical control of the flight rather than physical control. And 5th generation fighter we have been looking for. They are based on stealth, they are much faster, they have supersonic capabilities in that regard, and F-22 Raptor and F-35 Lightning are the two most important. China has J-20 which is its counterpart, but basically we lack in this zone. We want an indigenous fighter in this zone. In that regard it becomes important. So with this we'll just look at the mains question. First is, Nano Urea has the potentiality to make India self-sufficient in the agro-fertilizer sector. Elucidate a very interesting question which talks about how self-sufficiency can be brought in through Nano Urea. So please remember, it's not a basic question of science and tech or agriculture. It's about more economy and how it can change the import profile. Then India's recent engagement with Russia has demonstrated a unique and independent foreign policy. Very interesting question, can be answered through whatever is happening at this point of time, but that article gives us an opportunity to revise it. You can write these answers and you can check where you can send it in the link given in the description below. But I hope that this session was fruitful for you. Thank you so much for your patience. I will see you in the next CNA. Thank you, take care, and bye-bye.